My name is Rachel Carter, and I was 25 the night my brother shoved me toward the kitchen in front of everyone and said, "Know your place. Start washing dishes." The worst part wasn't the push. It was the silence after it. My heels slipped against the polished floor, the tray in my hands tilted, and for one terrifying second, the crystal glasses rattled like they were about to expose every secret I had been forced to carry. My fingers tightened until the metal edge cut into my skin. The smell of lemon dish soap from the kitchen hit me, and suddenly I was 12 again, standing on a stool, scrubbing pans while the rest of the family smiled for photographs without me. Across the room, my parents heard him. They saw my shoulder hit the swinging kitchen door. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, not from shock, but from warning. My father looked down at his plate like mashed potatoes had become more important than his daughter. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because humiliation has a strange way of turning into clarity when it happens in public. I was about to set the tray down, walk out, and let their perfect reception collapse without me. Then my 80-year-old grandfather slowly stood from his chair. My mother's face drained of color before he even spoke. He lifted one trembling hand, pointed it at my brother, and said, "Enough." Before I tell you what he said and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? And what's the weather like where you are? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The sound that followed my grandfather's voice was not silence. It was panic trying to hide under expensive music. Silverware stopped halfway to mouths. Someone coughed too loudly. A chair scraped against marble. My brother James turned around with the same face he used whenever consequences approached him, annoyed, offended, almost confused that anyone dared interrupt his little performance. My mother, Caroline, remained frozen near the het. One hand pressed against the pearl necklace she wore whenever she wanted people to remember she was important. My father, Leonard, still refused to meet my eyes, and my grandfather, Harold Carter, stood there in his dark suit, 80 years old, leaning slightly on his cane, but somehow larger than every person in that room. That was when the smell of roasted rosemary from the serving station pulled me backward into memory. Not a soft memory, a sharp one. I was 13, standing in our home kitchen, stirring a pot of soup for a family dinner because Caroline had decided I needed to learn usefulness. I had followed the recipe exactly. But when James wrinkled his nose and said it tasted poor, my mother dumped the entire pot into the trash and told me, "Presentation matters, Rachel. If you can't make something look right, don't attach our name to it." That sentence followed me for years. It followed me when I became an event planner. It followed me when I built mood boards in secret at 2 in the morning while James bragged about creative leadership at dinners. He never helped arrange. It followed me when Caroline told her friends that my job was cute. As if I arranged balloons for children instead of negotiating contracts, budgets, vendors, safety plans, schedules, donors, permits, and the million tiny details that kept wealthy people from noticing chaos. It even followed me when I won my first small client outside the family business, and Caroline smiled coldly before asking whether the client had hired me out of pity. The reception that night was supposed to be James' victory lap. Officially, it celebrated his new partnership in the family event company and his upcoming marriage into another powerful family. Unofficially, it was a staged performance designed to convince investors that James was ready to take over. The menu, the lighting, the floral arch, the seating plan, the timing of the speeches, even the way the dessert table faced the photographers. Those were mine. I had designed all of it. But the printed program said, "Concept by James Carter." My name appeared nowhere. 3 days earlier, my best friend Emily had texted me a photo of the final vendor file and asked, "Did you authorize them to remove your credit?" I stared at that message for so long, my phone screen went dark in my hand. Emily had known me since college before I learned to apologize for breathing too loudly around my family. She was the one person who understood that I did not want revenge because I was cruel. I wanted truth because I was tired. She told me to save every email, every invoice, every draft, every voice memo. So, I did. At first, I felt guilty collecting proof against my own blood. Then, I remembered how many times they had collected my labor without guilt. I did not know then why my grandfather had called me the night before the reception and asked, "Rachel, can you stay until the speeches? No matter what happens, don't leave before I stand." I almost asked him what he meant, but his voice sounded older than usual, and beneath that age was anger. Not loud anger, careful anger, the kind that had been counting receipts. So when James shoved me, when the tray shook in my hands, when my mother chose silence again, I realized something that made my throat close like a fist. Harold had not come to rescue me by accident. He had been waiting. And maybe for the first time in my life, someone in that family had seen exactly where they kept putting me. James recovered first because men like my brother believed confidence could erase evidence. He laughed too sharp and too loud, then spread his hands toward the guests as if this were all a charming misunderstanding. "Grandpa, relax," he said. "Rachel's just being sensitive. We're all helping tonight." That word helping nearly made me drop the tray for real. Helping was what they called it when I worked 18 unpaid hours to make sure his investors had the right wine. Helping was what Caroline called it when she asked me to rewrite her speeches and then scolded me for using words she could not pronounce smoothly. Helping was what Leonard called it when I covered James' budgeting mistakes so the company payroll cleared on Friday. I looked down at the tray and saw my hands shaking. The glasses clicked together again. Tiny bright sounds like teeth chattering. Across the room, one of James's college friends smirked and whispered something to another man near the bar. I recognized that man immediately, Victor Hale, a corporate sponsor I had spent 6 months trying to reach for my own independent event proposal. James had invited him tonight, not because he cared about family celebration, but because he wanted money, reputation, and witnesses. My stomach tightened when I realized Victor was watching all of this. Not as a guest, but as a businessman measuring the character of the people asking for his trust. "Rachel loves drama," James continued, stepping closer. "She always has. Give her a task and suddenly she acts like Cinderella." A few people laughed politely, not because it was funny, but because rich rooms laugh when they are told which side has power. I felt the old instinct rise in me. Swallow it, smile, survive. But then I saw Victor glance toward the slideshow screen near the stage. The first design board appeared under James's name. My color palette, my floor plan, my handwritten note about keeping the elderly guests near the quiet corner. My work was glowing 10 feet high while my brother told people I belonged with dirty plates. My phone buzzed in my clutch on the prep table. I looked down just long enough to see Emily's name and a message preview. "He's using your proposal tonight. Don't sign anything. Harold has copies." My pulse changed. It did not race anymore. It steadied. That scared me more than fear. James stepped closer and lowered his voice, but not enough. "Don't embarrass me tonight," he said. "You already made it hard enough convincing people you're not unstable." The word unstable landed harder than the shove. It was the label they used whenever I remembered something accurately. It was the label Caroline attached to me whenever I asked why James's mistakes became my responsibility. Caroline moved, then slicing through the crowd in her champagne dress like a blade wrapped in silk. "What is going on?" she asked. But her eyes were on me, not him. She knew exactly what was going on. She had trained this moment into all of us. James could insult. I could absorb. The family could continue smiling. "Your son shoved me," I said. My voice sounded different. Not louder, cleaner. Caroline's mouth tightened. "This is not the time for exaggerations." Everyone heard him. "Ah, everyone heard you raise your voice," she corrected. That was her gift. She could turn pain into poor manners in under 5 seconds. James looked pleased again, rescued by the family system that had protected him since childhood. Then Victor Hale spoke from beside the bar. Actually, I heard him. The room shifted. It was not support. Not yet, but attention. James' smile weakened. Caroline looked toward Victor, calculated his importance, and immediately changed her tone. "I'm sure there was a misunderstanding." "There was," I said, "for years." My mother's eyes flashed warning, but I had already stepped too far into the open to pretend I did not know the way back. I turned toward James. "You didn't just ask me to wash dishes. You wanted me out of the room before the speeches because you knew the investors were about to praise work you stole. A gasp rose, soft but real. James's face hardened. Careful. The word came out like a threat, and there it was. The hidden thing underneath the family jokes, the command, the shove, not sibling teasing, control. I could have exposed him right then. I could have told the room about the call I overheard 2 nights earlier when he told a vendor, "Don't mention Rachel. She's family labor, not leadership." I could have mentioned the altered file names, the deleted credits, the meeting invites that somehow vanished from my inbox. But Harold lifted one finger from across the room, barely noticeable, and I understood. Not yet. Let them speak first. Let them build the trap with their own mouths. Harold walked forward slowly, and every step of his cane against the floor sounded like a judge striking a gavel. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. That was what made Caroline afraid. My grandfather had never been theatrical. He was the kind of man who remembered numbers, dates, signatures, and promises. When my grandmother died, he stopped attending most company meetings, and Caroline convinced everyone he had become too gentle to notice what was happening. But grief had not made him blind. It had made him quiet. Later, I would learn that for months he had been asking old accountants small questions, requesting archived invoices, calling vendors directly, and comparing file timestamps with the patience of a man who had built a company from nothing and knew exactly how lies looked on paper. "James," Harold said, "apologized to your sister." James let out a humorless laugh. "For what?" "For telling her to help where she's actually useful." Some guests looked away, others leaned forward. Caroline stepped between them slightly, smiling with the desperation of someone trying to keep a curtain closed while the stage burned behind it. "Dad, please, you're tired. This is a celebration." Harold looked at her and something in his face made my mother's fake smile collapse. "No, Caroline. This is a performance and I'm tired of funding performances." The words hit the room like broken glass. My father finally looked up. James blinked. My skin prickled because I heard something underneath Harold's sentence. Not just anger, but decision. "Rachel," Harold said, turning to me. "How many hours did you spend planning tonight?" I swallowed. Every answer felt dangerous. I stopped counting after 100. A murmur spread through the guests. Harold nodded as if he had expected that. "And how much were you paid?" My mother snapped. "That is a private family matter." "Then you should have kept the disrespect private, too." "Oh," Harold replied. My chest tightened so quickly I almost forgot to breathe. No one spoke to Caroline that way. Not James. Not Leonard. Not even people she had hurt. She survived by making others believe confrontation was vulgar and silence was classy. Harold turned toward the screen where James' name still sat under my design board. That concept was created by Rachel Carter. The vendor schedule was created by Rachel Carter. The sponsor packet, donor flow, guest experience map, emergency staffing chart, and budget recovery plan were created by Rachel Carter. He looked around the room, meeting eyes one by one. The only thing James created was the story that he deserved credit for it. James' face flushed dark red. "That's not true." "Then explain invoice 47B, Harold said. Caroline inhaled sharply. I did not know what invoice 47B was, but she did. Harold reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a folded document. Not a dramatic stack. 1 page. Somehow that was worse. Explain why Rachel's vendor notes were forwarded from her email to yours 2 hours before the presentation file was changed. Explain why her initials were removed from the contract draft. Explain why the company paid a rush design fee to an outside consultant for work Rachel had already completed. Explain why the consultant's invoice matches a shell vendor your mother approved last quarter. The room went even colder. Caroline's eyes darted toward Leonard, but he had already looked away again. James stared at the paper like it had personally betrayed him. Grandpa, you don't understand modern business. People collaborate. Rachel helped. Sure, but leadership means knowing how to present the work. Harold's voice dropped. Leadership does not shove people toward kitchens. Leadership does not steal credit from the only person holding the roof up. He paused, letting the sentence settle into every expensive corner of the room. You all keep talking about family reputation. Tell me, is family love something you buy with reputation? Or is reputation just the mask you put on after you treat your own daughter like hired help? The question landed in the center of the room and stayed there. I felt the guests watching me differently now. Not with pity, with recognition, the kind that hurts because it arrives late. I looked at my grandfather, then really looked at him and saw the truth. He was not saving me from one insult. He was ending a pattern he had finally gathered enough proof to challenge. For years, I had wondered whether anyone saw the cage I lived in. Harold had not only seen it. He had measured every bar. Caroline's face changed in a way I had seen only twice before. Once when a major donor cancelled a check, and once when James crashed my father's car at 19 and she spent the entire night calling lawyers instead of asking whether the other driver was okay. Her fear did not look soft. It looked furious. "Rachel," she said, turning to me with a trembling smile. "I know you're emotional, but this is becoming cruel. Your brother is under enormous pressure and you have always struggled when attention isn't on you." There it was, the rescue rope she threw to James by wrapping it around my throat. For a second, the old shame rose automatically. Maybe I was emotional. Maybe I had picked the wrong moment. Maybe I was ruining something. Then Emily's message flashed in my mind. "Don't sign anything. Harold has copies." I straightened. If attention was what I wanted, I said, I would have put my name on the program before you removed it. Caroline's eyes sharpened. "You are twisting things." "No," Harold said. "She is finally untwisting them." James stepped toward him. "This is insane. You're letting her manipulate you." Harold's grip tightened on his cane. "I have been manipulated, James. Just not by Rachel." He turned to the guests, then to Victor Hale, then back to my mother. Since everyone here was invited to celebrate the future of Carter and cupboard events, perhaps everyone should know what future they were being sold. Carolyn went pale again. Leonard stood halfway, then sat back down like a man whose courage had expired before use. Harold continued. 16 months ago, James mishandled the Harrington Charity Gala account. The budget overrun was not Rachel's error. It came from unauthorized upgrades James approved to impress 2 board members. When the client threatened legal action, company funds were moved to cover the loss, and Rachel's department was blamed. My mouth went dry. I remembered that month. The closed doors, the cold looks, Caroline telling me I needed to take responsibility for how my work appeared. I had cried in my car for an hour, then gone back inside to revise the apology letter they made me sign. "That's confidential," Caroline hissed. Harold looked at her sadly. So was Rachel's humiliation, apparently. Until your son made it public. James' friends were no longer laughing. Victor Hale's expression had gone flat, professional, unreadable. That frightened James more than shouting would have. Caroline tried another angle. "Family businesses have internal complications. This is inappropriate. You used family as a locked door." I said, "Every time I asked for credit, you said loyalty. Every time I asked for payment, you said gratitude. Every time James failed, you handed me the broom and told me to clean quietly." My voice cracked on the last word, but I did not apologize for it. Let it crack. Let them hear the damage. James scoffed, though sweat shone near his temple. "You loved playing victim." I turned toward him. "No, James. I loved you." That was the problem. For the first time, he had no immediate answer. The words surprised me too because they were true. I had loved him when we were children. When he snuck me cookies after Caroline said dessert was for guests. I had loved the brother who once stood between me and a barking dog. I kept waiting for that boy to come back. But somewhere along the way, he learned that cruelty earned applause in our house and he became fluent in it. Caroline saw the room softening and attacked harder. "Rachel has always been unstable. Ask anyone. She exaggerates. She keeps grudges. She has no sense of timing. That is why she was never given leadership." A woman near the dessert table whispered. "My God." Harold unfolded another page. Actually, she was never given leadership because you blocked it. Caroline froze. 3 years ago, Rachel submitted a proposal to lead the Mororo Foundation Gala. You told the board she withdrew for personal reasons. She did not. You withdrew her without consent and gave the preliminary plan to James. My knees weakened. I had wondered for years why that opportunity disappeared. Caroline had told me the foundation wanted a stronger face. I believed her because daughters often believe mothers before they believe themselves. Harold's voice softened, but the words cut deeper. You did not protect the family image. You protected James from comparison. The room erupted into whispers. James looked at Caroline. For the first time, anger flickered between them instead of toward me. The perfect machine had missed a gear. And I realized quiet revenge did not always begin with shouting. Sometimes it began with documentation read aloud by an old man who had finally decided love without truth was just another lie. Caroline reached for control like a drowning woman reaching for a silk scarf. This ends now, she said. Rachel, go to the kitchen. James, return to your guests. Dad, we will discuss your confusion privately. The word confusion made Harold's eyes harden. My grandfather had survived war, debt, grief, and 2 heart surgeries. Caroline had mistaken his patience for weakness, and now she was trying to turn age into a muzzle. I am not confused, he said. I am prepared. That sentence moved through me like electricity. James looked toward the entrance as if searching for someone who could stop this, but the only person entering was Emily. She wore a simple black dress and carried a slim folder against her chest. She was not family, so Caroline immediately snapped, Who invited you? Emily looked at me first, checking my face the way real friends do. Then she answered calmly. The venue did. I'm here as the independent contract witness for the revised proposal. James' head jerked toward me. What revised proposal? My heart pounded once hard. This was the part one had been afraid to admit, even to myself. For months, I had been building something outside their reach. Not because I wanted to betray them, but because I needed one place where my work could exist without being swallowed. Mine, I said. RC Events. Caroline stared. You created a company behind our backs. No, I said. I created one in front of you. You just never looked at anything unless James' name was on it. A few guests reacted under their breath. Someone near the bar said, Damn. James's face twisted. You can't use our client list. I didn't. You can't use company templates. I didn't. You can't use tonight's designs. Actually, Emily said, opening her folder. The designs were created by Rachel before any employment assignment clause was signed for this event. The time-stamped drafts, original files, and correspondence establish authorship. The company can display them tonight only because Rachel permitted it under written vendor coordination emails. The removal of her credit, however, was not authorized. Caroline looked like she wanted to slap the folder out of Emily's hand. Victor Hale stepped forward slightly. Miss Carter, is that true? For one insane second, both Caroline and I answered in our own minds. She wanted to say no. I finally said, yes, it's true. Victor's gaze moved to James. You told me your leadership team generated the concept. James swallowed. Rachel is part of the team. A part you told to wash dishes. No one laughed this time. James's shame was no longer private, and he did not know how to wear it. Caroline tried to recover. Victor, please. This is a family disagreement. Rachel is talented, but she can be difficult. James has the executive presence needed for donors. I felt something inside me release, not explode. Release. For years, I had begged to be described as capable. That night, I no longer needed Caroline to say it. Then let him lead without my work, I said. My mother turned sharply. What? I removed the small headset I had been wearing to coordinate the staff and placed it on the nearest table. I'm done with the reception, with unpaid rescue work, with being erased, with being told family means obedience. If James is the leader, let him handle the next vendor delay, the missing dessert shipment, the late pianist, and the donor speech scheduled in 12 minutes that he has never read. James looked toward the stage, suddenly alert. What donor speech? I almost smiled. Exactly. The room absorbed that like a slow thunderclap. Harold's mouth twitched. Not amusement, but pride he was trying not to show too soon. Caroline stepped close enough that her perfume burned my nose. You will not sabotage this night. I'm not sabotaging it, I said. I am simply withdrawing the labor you never valued. If you were me, how many years would you have stayed silent before finally putting down the tray? Comment below because I used to think silence made me loyal. That night, I learned it only made me available. James grabbed the headset from the table, fumbled with the button, and barked. Kitchen status. Static answered. He looked ridiculous. Expensive suit, panicked eyes, no idea which team member handled which problem. A server approached him and asked about the allergy-safe plates for table 6. James stared blankly. Another staff member asked whether the sponsor champagne should be held until after Harold's announcement. James looked at Caroline. Caroline looked at me, and for the first time all night, I did not move. The machine they had built on my invisible labor began to cough in front of everyone. Harold lifted his cane once and the staff stopped waiting for James, not because he scared them, but because half of them had known for years who actually kept things running. He looked at me and said, Rachel, if you choose to leave, leave. If you choose to finish the night, finish it under your own name. My throat tightened. That was the first real choice anyone in that family had offered me in years. Caroline heard the danger immediately under her own name. Dad, don't be absurd. Harold turned to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, since this reception was also meant to announce the future leadership of Carter and Coup events, I believe we should correct the program. James moved fast. Grandpa, stop. Harold did not. He walked toward the microphone with Emily beside him and me standing where my brother had tried to send me, between the kitchen door and the public room, between labor and recognition, between the old life and whatever came next. The microphone gave a small whine when Harold touched it. The guests turned. Caroline whispered my name like a threat. I did not answer. Harold's voice filled the room, rough but steady. Tonight you were told my grandson James created this event concept and would soon lead our company into its next chapter. That was false. James shut his eyes for half a second. The person responsible for the design, vendor recovery, sponsor experience, staffing system, and donor flow is my granddaughter, Rachel Carter. The room looked at me. I wanted to disappear. Then I realized disappearing was exactly what I had been trained to do, so I stayed visible. Harold continued, over the last year, I ordered an independent review of company records. That review confirmed a pattern of credit removal, unauthorized account changes, and financial decisions made to protect James at Rachel's expense. Effective Monday morning, James Carter will be removed from operational leadership pending board review. A shock ran through the room. James staggered back as if the words had physically struck him. You can't do that, he said, but it came out weak. Harold looked at him with deep sadness. I already have. Caroline rushed toward the stage. Dad, this company is our family legacy. No, Harold said. The company is work. Family is how you treat people when no one is clapping. That sentence broke something in me. Not in a dramatic way, more like a locked door opening after years of rust. Harold unfolded the final document and Caroline's face collapsed before he read it. My voting shares will be transferred into a trust requiring independent board oversight. Rachel Carter will be offered the role of creative director with full compensation, public credit, and authority over client-facing concepts. If she refuses, the company may not use her portfolio, her vendor systems, or her proposal materials. James looked at me, then really looked as if seeing not his little sister, not the family servant, not the convenient scapegoat, but the person holding the structure he had been standing on. Victor Hale stepped forward. Mr. Carter, he said to Harold, the Foundation will pause all discussions with James until the review is complete. Miss Carter, if you are willing, I would like to schedule a meeting with your company, RC Events, this week. Caroline made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not rage, loss. The kind of loss that comes when control leaves the room and takes the future with it. James turned on her. You said Grandpa would sign tonight. The room went colder. Harold's eyes narrowed. So that was the plan, Caroline whispered. James, but it was too late. He had exposed what she had tried to bury. They had not invited Harold to honor him. They had invited him to corner him into handing over control while the whole room celebrated James. My shove toward the kitchen had not been random cruelty. It had been strategy. They needed me away from the announcement because someone might ask why the best parts of the company's future sounded like my work. I looked at my mother and finally understood her fear. She had never been afraid I would fail. She had been afraid I would be seen. James's face wreathed with humiliation as his friends avoided his eyes. The sponsor he had bragged about no longer wanted him. The company role he thought was guaranteed had vanished in public. Caroline's perfect reception had become a witness stand. My father stood slowly, opened his mouth, closed it, and sat back down. That was his entire contribution to my childhood. And that night, almost speaking, Harold handed the microphone to me. I stared at it. For years, I had imagined giving a speech where I listed every wound, every stolen credit, every dinner where I was sent to clean while James was praised. But standing there, I discovered I did not want to bleed for their entertainment. I have one thing to say, I said. My voice shook, but it did not break. I did not want this night to become ugly. I wanted my family to choose decency before consequences. They didn't. So, I'm choosing myself. I looked at James. I hope losing the applause teaches you what stealing it never could. Then I looked at Caroline. And I hope one day you understand that a daughter is not a stain on a family image just because she refuses to be used. No one moved. I set the microphone down. The staff manager approached me quietly and asked, "Do you want us to continue under your direction?" I looked at the guests, the unfinished program, the stunned sponsor, my grandfather waiting with tired but proud eyes. Part of me wanted to burn the night down completely. Another part of me knew I did not need ashes to prove there had been a fire. Yes, I said, but changed the final slide. To what? I glanced at the screen where James's name still sat under my work. Concept and Execution by Rachel Carter, RC Events. The staff manager nodded and walked away. 3 minutes later, my name appeared 10 feet high above the room that had watched me be shoved. No music swelled. No one burst into applause at first. Then Harold clapped once. Emily joined. Victor Hale followed slowly, awkwardly, then fully. The room began to clap. Not for the perfect Carter family, not for James, not for Caroline's polished lie, but for the woman they had mistaken for background. James walked out before dessert. Caroline stayed because leaving would admit defeat, but every smile she forced looked painful. I finished the reception with calm hands. When the last donor left, Harold touched my shoulder and whispered, "Your grandmother would have been proud." That was when I almost cried. Not when James shoved me. Not when Caroline attacked me. Not when the truth came out. I almost cried when someone finally connected my name to pride instead of duty. Before leaving, I walked into the kitchen one last time. The sink was full. The dishes were stacked high. For once, I did not roll up my sleeves. I placed the headset on the counter, took my coat, and stepped into the cold night with Emily beside me and Harold waiting by the car. My phone buzzed before I reached the curb. An email from Victor Hale. Subject, meeting request, RC Events. I smiled small and quiet, not because my family had been destroyed, but because their version of me had been. And that was the revenge I never knew I needed. So tell me honestly, have you ever been treated like the useful one instead of the loved one? Would you have stayed to finish the night or walked out and let everything fall apart? Comment below, because sometimes the strongest revenge is not screaming, not begging, and not proving every wound. Sometimes it is simply putting down the tray, letting the truth stand in your place, and walking away with your name finally intact.